sent me this email after my last video ranting about the RX 9050 8GB and 4GB versions, and it's quite frankly insulting. And then this is apparently the strong overall entry-level gaming value that they're talking about. $850 for a 4GB 9050 card with 8GB of system memory, which is incredibly disgusting since you will be spilling over into system memory when you try to play almost any modern game on a 4GB graphics card. And we have some performance benchmarks out now for the 8GB version of the 9050, which will be significantly faster than the 4GB version, not just when you're spilling over VRAM, but also because they cut the memory bandwidth in half, and it's already 30% slower than the laughably bad RTX 5050 in games. So we need to talk about this and a whole bunch of other news topics. However, before I finish ranting about the 9050 4GB, let me rant about this. I was just using Gmail recently and honestly got really creeped out. It was obviously not only reading all of my emails, but it wanted to write out the entire reply for me as if it was me, and then I had to dig deep in the settings to turn that off. It's always been creepy how much tracking and spyware there's been in using all these big tech services, but it's getting exponentially worse. And if you want to get out of all of that and move to an internet that's based on privacy, check out Proton Mail. A huge thank you to them for sponsoring this video. And it was founded by a team of scientists who met at CERN to build a better internet where privacy is actually the default. And so the whole idea here is with Proton Mail, you can have mail that the company isn't reading. It's zero access encryption, so even Proton can't read the emails or attachments. And if you're emailing between other Proton users, then it's encrypted on both sides. This also can do tracker blocking, where oftentimes you get an email that has an invisible tracker in it. I think it's called a pixel. Anyway, so you can get tracker blocking through that. You get, all the, dark web monitoring, email aliases. But in general, just the idea of getting out of these systems where you are the product, they are monitoring you, harvesting your data for their own purposes, and you have little control over that. Proton is the solution here. And if you're worried about switching being the difficulty here, you're like, I'd like to do this, but switching is hard, check out their migration service, because it's actually very easy to switch. And you can, if you still want to keep your Gmail or whatever account, you can have those automatically forward into Proton, or you can start fresh either way. But seriously, check out your free Proton Mail account following the link in the video description and or pinned comment. Okay, so how laughably bad is this? The RX 9050 4GB with 8GB of system memory, Ryzen 5 5500, and a 500GB SSD coming in at $850. Now, while this currently isn't in stock yet, this is available on seemingly the US Best Buy store, website, despite this having been marketed as a not a US region product. And AMD again says that the 9050 4GB was developed specifically for a partner system. So they're not planning to sell it separately. They're just gonna scam people who don't know any better and their mom's trying to buy them a gaming PC at Best Buy, and they think if you're spending $850 on a gaming PC that you're probably gonna get at least a reasonably good experience. So naming it the 9050, the same as the 8GB version, despite cutting not only the VRAM capacity in half, but also the memory bandwidth in half, is absolutely disgusting. But apparently this is designed to deliver strong overall value for entry-level gaming customers, and the memory configuration was selected to align with the intended use case of that system. Also, in my last video, some people were saying that, well, clearly this isn't targeted for gaming. Well, here, this is literally targeted as a gaming desktop named the Gamer Master. This is the Gamer Master, guys. Gaming desktop, and specifically AMD is telling me that this is for entry-level gaming customers. So this is your overall strong value for the gamer masters out there. You get a 4GB 9050 and 8GB of system RAM. So when you inevitably spill over your VRAM capacity, you now get 8GB of system RAM, which already in and of itself can barely run a modern game, let alone trying to have a web browser open at the same time. But this is strong value, guys. So the 9050 8GB version gets you about 30% less performance than a 5050, and this has been benchmarked in a considerable number of games now. I found this at videocards.com. Apparently it was reviewed by GDM, which is not an English language outlet. Here's the results. Sometimes it's only like 10 to 20% faster, but the overall average has it about, it's slower. Overall average has it about 30% slower. So if we're kind of trying to get a ballpark figure for where this is at, cards that are about 30% slower than the RTX 5050, this will mean it's probably slower than the RX 6600 or an ARC A580, not B580. It's probably around the performance of an RTX 2060 or so. We're talking cards like, decade-old, 1080 or 1070 Ti are actually in this similar kind of ballpark. 5600 XT. This is disgustingly slow. Cards like the RTX 3060 12GB are probably significantly faster, and we're talking about the 8GB version, which doesn't have its memory bandwidth cut in half, which will affect performance significantly even when you're within your 4GB of VRAM capacity. So that's the kind of overall performance that we're looking at here. So let's see if we can build a system like this and show off what a strong overall value this really is. So we had a Ryzen 5 5500. So let me get one of those. Okay, so I can get that. We will use the bundled cooler for strong value. Let's see, we can get a B550M motherboard for about $70. So let's slot that in. So 8GB of system memory is absolutely disgusting. So I'm not even going to put that in my comparable system. I will put at least 16GB of system memory in this. So I could either go with one 16GB stick of DDR4, which looks like I could get for $87 right now, or we could try to get into dual channel at 2x8, and we could do that for $100. I think getting the dual channel on that is going to be worth it, so I'm going to go ahead and do that. Let's see, so we need at least a 500GB SSD to go along with that. So let's go here, sort for 500GB SSDs. I'm not like researching too hard here. Well, we want at least an SSD, not just a hard drive. So I'll at least sort for that. Okay, here's something for about $75. This is really kind of placeholders, but you get the idea. And then let's see, let's get the case and power supply in here, and then we'll kind of go from there. So let's see, I can get a reasonable case here for about $44, and let's just go with some sort of cheap power supply, because I don't see exactly what power supply is in this system. Something tells me, given these amazing quality on the other specs, that they might have had to go, just a little bit low on the power supply. Okay, here's a Thermaltake Smart 600 watt power supply that has at least mostly 4-star reviews for like $40. Okay, so we've got that. That comes out to about $400. So now I can fit in the video card. So let's see. I could get a RX 9060 XT. I bet I can even fit the 16GB version in this and still hit the price point of this build. So the 9060 XT 8GB version, if I slot that in, that brings us to about $765. So about almost $100 less than this amazing value, strong overall value for the intended customers. I can build it for almost $100 off and have twice the system RAM and 4 times the VRAM and probably more than double the actual gaming performance on the GPU. And I'm doing it at $100 less, but this is the strong overall value that we're getting here. In fact, if I have $850 to spend, I think we can get the 16GB version in here. So let's get the 9060 XT 16GB version in here. And I think, $450, this will fit the budget. So $855, we basically absolutely nailed the price point. We have the same CPU, we have double the system memory, 4 times the VRAM, double the GPU performance. Oh my goodness. Okay, so that is the strong overall value that AMD is offering in this pre-built system that is certainly not designed to scam little Timmy's mom who just wants to buy him a gaming PC at Best Buy and thinks that, if it costs $850, it must at least be better than a PlayStation 5 or something like that, right? Okay, so anyway, that's where we're at with this, and I really find this kind of naming scheme because especially where they're trying to act like the fact that this isn't being sold on the DIY market as somehow excusing this product, that makes it worse because there will be fewer reviews of this available. When you look up a review for the 9050, trying to do your due diligence, especially if you're like Timmy's mom who doesn't really understand all of this and is just trying to buy a decent gaming PC, you look up the 9050 review, you find that it seems, you know, like it plays games okay, even if it's not lauded for its amazing value, but now they've got the 4GB version in there, which you don't really understand what that means and that it's different than this one. And then not only is it having less VRAM, but also cutting that memory bandwidth and half is affecting performance. This is really, truly anti-consumer practice that is designed to scam people who don't know any better. That's what this is. That does not excuse this. It makes it worse. You could have just called it a 9040 or a 9030 so that when somebody's actually trying to do their due diligence and research the product, they can actually find reviews of the product that they're purchasing in the system. Anyway, let's go ahead and move on to some other news topics. So, it looks like if you were trying to buy a GPU for around this same price point as the 8GB 9050, you could get an Intel Arc B580, which is back down to around $290 on Newegg and offers 12 gigabytes of VRAM. So that means if I check the performance numbers, remember we just saw that the 9050 8GB is about 30% slower than the 5050, even on its 8GB version. So let's see, that puts, the B580 is about tied with the RTX 5050. So the Arc B580 is about the same price as the 8GB 9050 and offers 12 gigabytes of VRAM and significantly more performance. So there's that. And hey, AMD has notified that their prices are probably rising 10% in August. Now, what this appears to be is the same as the one we had rumored for July, but they had actually decided to hold off on those price increases because Nvidia hadn't raised prices yet. And so overall, this is kind of the same one we had rumored as incoming, but it's just now for August instead of July when it had been originally targeted. All my sources will be in the video description. Here's the overall quote on this. So, according to information confirmed by AMD's internal supply chain, AMD finalized a price increase plan for bundled GPU cores and memory last month, but did not immediately implement the price increase, choosing instead to postpone its implementation. This was mainly due to the current weak recovery phase in the consumer graphics card market, high price sensitivity at the end user level, existing inventory still needing to be digested, and the fact that NV series graphics card prices have not yet increased. This was to avoid the risk of declining product competitiveness and market share loss from a hasty price adjustment during a period of demand pressure. However, with the confirmed price increase for the NV series, AMD has notified AIB brand manufacturers that the price increase will be at least 10%, and all brands will officially implement the price increase uniformly starting next month. At that time, the price positioning is expected to be similar to that of the NV series graphics cards. In other words, like I said, AMD had already notified that they'd be implementing a price increase, but then because Nvidia hadn't done so yet, they held off to avoid losing market share because they do notice that the consumer graphics card market is highly price sensitive at the end user level. In other words, buyers are informed here and will be sensitive to these increases in prices. So basically, they were just waiting till Nvidia raised prices, and now that they've confirmed that should be incoming in August as well, now AMD will follow suit. So they're not going to try to hold off in order to gain market share against Nvidia. They're just going to do what Nvidia does and just try to just kind of maintain the status quo relative to Nvidia. Seems to be kind of the plan here. We're already seeing signs of the 50 series prices increasing, with Best Buy now having an RTX 5080 priced higher than the 5090's original MSRP. So it is now over $2,000. And that, I mean, it's disgusting, but you can't buy a 5090 for less than like $4,000 now in the US. So I guess that's just how it's going to be. We see other prices increasing as well with the Arc G3 Extreme-based handhelds, which had originally launched from 1X Player as low as $1,400, is now up to $1,500 with that initial kind of more promotional pricing expiring here. Now, kind of an interesting story regarding how people have been discussing driver stability lately, and it's really hard to get any official numbers on AMD versus Nvidia driver stability on any particular version, because the how large those data sets have to be to get any kind of meaningful comparison that's based on hard numbers rather than just feelings and sentiment in comment sections, etc., is pretty hard to do. However, Path of Exile 2 developers have been struggling with Nvidia driver issues for quite a while now, and they have finally got Nvidia to fix the problem. It was a driver tweak that did solve the problem from Nvidia's end. And they have the numbers to show that fixed it. They're so happy now. They're celebrating with champagne. Now, this is kind of interesting that they've gone into this. So this is a really interesting chart. So this is the crash rate in Path of Exile 2 for different driver versions of NVIDIA drivers. So the blue line with an almost 0% crash rate were drivers that were released before 2024. However, they have driver versions that were released mid-July 2026 plus. You can see that once they hit this new driver patch, it dropped down to basically 0%. So we see that once this driver was implemented, the crash rate just absolutely dropped down to previous levels. However, the driver versions between 2024 and mid-July 2026 were showing a crash rate of nearly 2%, which, that's actually fairly high if you think about it, so especially compared to the nearly 0% that you're seeing on the driver versions before 2024. So a lot of people have complained about driver versions past a certain point from NVIDIA being less stable, and while this is just one game, this is at least interesting data on a large data set for a particular game. Now, apparently they'd been trying to work with NVIDIA to fix this driver issue for over a year now. However, NVIDIA couldn't, consistently repeat the problems. So the game developers eventually found a system where it was repeatable and then shipped the computer to NVIDIA that was having this problem until they assigned one of their driver engineers to take a look at that system. And they just increased the, shader size, shader heap size. There we go. So they increased the internal shader heap size on a specific thing there just for the Path of Exile 2 profile, and that completely solved the problem and seems to also reduce the length of the shader cache compilation time as well. So that's kind of just an interesting study with more details and more hard numbers than is easy to come by when talking about driver stability and all of that. Now, another big news topic lady instead of lately. Another big news topic has been more in the console space, talking about the death of discs on PlayStation, who has promised that starting in 2028, new games will not get disc versions. Now, Sony has been asked about that in a financial call now, where when you're talking earnings calls to investors, you have to give some honest responses to these types of situations. So Sony's current strategy since announcing this on the consumer-facing side of things has just been silence. They announced it was happening and then just didn't say anything, hoping for this to eventually kind of blow over and leave the news cycle. But when asked in an earnings call, the Sony CFO, Chief Financial Officer Lin Tao, did have to talk about it. So she said There are various reasons we made this decision, the biggest being that the digitalization of content overall has been progressing. That's a big factor. It's not just for PlayStation, but for all kinds of content. Digitalization is progressing. And so when we think about the future and we put in a lot of thought and time, and we cautiously considered this, and we came to this conclusion, and we're going to cautiously move this forward. And to this decision, we have received various opinions, and people have strong views, and we understand that the community has put forth those views to us. Games are loved by many people. It's a form of entertainment that's loved by people, and it's connected to people's fond memories in many cases. And so we understand those emotions. We want to consider that. And in the future digital ecosystem, how do we engage the gamer is something that we would like to continue to explore. So I want you guys to notice that this is basically a whole lot of, we thought about this carefully and we hear the concerns people have and we understand their strong emotional reaction, and we're still doing this. So they're saying in the future digital ecosystem. So this is happening. How do we engage the gamers is something that we like to continue to explore. Now, they were asked whether the backlash had impacted the PlayStation business, because we've seen like petitions being signed, there's been calls for boycotts of PlayStation Plus, etc. So when asked about it impacting the PlayStation business, the response was, at this point in time, we are not seeing any impact on our business. But going forward, about the content sales, a large part is already digitized. And therefore, as a result, the discontinuation of discs, we don't see that there will be any negative impact on our business. However, as I already said, the users, the players, have attachments, and we have to think about how to respond to those feedbacks. So in general, they're saying that they don't see this having any negative impact on their business, and they need to think of some way to get gamers to just stop whining about this and feel valued. So how to respond to those feedbacks. So in other words, they're looking for the right words to say to make people feel good about this, but it's absolutely happening, and they don't anticipate it having any negative impact on their business. So that's the official PlayStation response from their CFO regarding the decision to move to discless future starting in 2028. So while they seem to have their social media PR strategy be focused on just don't say anything, they did have to give some sort of a response on the earnings call. So there we are. Now, we finally have Valve bringing FSR 4.1 support to the Steam machine. They've also talked about reservations and wait lists, saying that they began shipping the Steam machine at the end of June, and now that we're a few weeks in, we wanted to share more information on the Steam machine itself and the status of the reservation queue and waitlist as it stands today. So FSR 4.1 is now available on Proton Experimental for titles supporting FSR upgrade, and the CAD files for the Steam machine external geometry is available for download here. So you can now get those CAD files to work on this, but overall what they're saying regarding the purchases is that they're expecting that everyone who currently holds a reservation will receive the opportunity to purchase the Steam machine before the end of the year. Once you've received notification that you can purchase it after getting a reservation, you have 72 hours to complete the order. And if that isn't completed within the time frame, the opportunity will be passed to the next customer in the queue. So Steam machine is still selling out its their capacity to produce it, but they're not producing a huge number of them, it seems like, monthly or anything like that. But at least they are selling out what they are able to produce, despite the pricing issues that they've had to deal with the current market. Now, since the Steam machine is kind of Linux-based, I thought I'd mention along with it that GOG, Good Old Games, has confirmed they are working towards a GOG Galaxy launcher on Linux. Some of their games are already available to purchase as a Linux version when games do support a Linux version, but GOG Galaxy itself doesn't have Linux support. So they do have somebody hired for a role to work on Linux support, But they mentioned that this is a significant undertaking, so while we're not ready to share any specific plans, timelines, or results just yet, it's very much an area we're investing time and effort into. So we don't know when we'll get something out of that. But speaking of not using Windows, if you use macOS and you really wish there was a Windows-style task manager, the original creator of the Windows Task Manager, Dave Plummer, is apparently working on building a similar task manager for macOS, where you could look at processes, CPU load, memory use, storage activity, network usage, etc. So that's kind of interesting, so thought I'd report on it. Also, we're seeing reports from the Brazilian graphics card repair Paulo Gomes and Sid Nelson about specifically a Gigabyte board issue on certain RTX 4060 cards, where they're claiming that this is a manufacturing default with faulty VRM design that is leading to burnout on the PCB. So they go into some detail on what they think is happening here, saying it's a VRM phase imbalance where Gigabyte's current control circuit has sizing error in resistors and capacitors, leading to irregular behavior where each power phase operates with completely unregulated frequencies and duty cycles relative to one another, overloading specific MOSFETs. And the result is that the MOSFET shorts out, collapses, and carbonizes the PCB right in the area near the video output, falsely simulating a spike coming from the HDMI port. So they're asking for Gigabyte to take a stance here, either issue a warranty or recall support, and are recommending that users pursue their rights under Brazil's Consumer Protection Code. So that's a pretty serious issue by the sounds of it to me, and it sounds like it is a design flaw. So if you have a Gigabyte RTX 4060, then you may need to keep your eye on this situation, and hopefully a big enough attention can be brought to this that at least warranties are honored, and this isn't blamed on the end user or anything like that, if not an entire recall being issued. Now, this made me think about how, sometimes people ask, like, should I just buy the cheapest version of any particular GPU, or are specific versions actually better? Because honestly, when you're just talking performance, even the highest end, custom cooler version with a factory overclock of a particular GPU oftentimes gets you small single-digit performance advantage over the cheapest possible cooler version. So oftentimes there's not a good reason to spend significantly more. But sometimes my general answer is you should research the specific model that you're looking at and see if there's any reports of it having a higher than usual failure rate, or some specific issue, like this Gigabyte RTX 4060 issue that we're seeing here. So I found this to be particularly interesting, where we have retailer data tracking every model of the RX 9070 XT and showing their RMA rates. So specifically, this is comparing MindFactory sales versus MindFactory customer service rate. They also have Alza sales versus Alza customer service rate. And you can compare these and see that there certainly does seem to be differences in the customer return rates for specific models, where many of them are around a 1% rate. Certain models seem to stand out as lower, where we see only a 0.17% rate on the Asus Primo C version, whereas comparatively on the RX 9070 XT Reaper, we see a 3.28% return rate. Now, these aren't all sold in exactly the same numbers, so you do need a high enough sample rate before things become statistically relevant or anything like that. But some of these models are sold in the thousands, where we have the Reaper 9070 XT selling, 2,350 plus, whereas the Hellhound from the same, both from Power Color selling over 4,000, whereas the customer service rates are significantly different at 0.47% versus 3.28%. Now, 3.28% still, like, that's not saying like you buy one of these, you absolutely guarantee to have a problem or something like that, but it could be something that you take into account when you're looking into buying, different models. I also talk about like you can compare differences in like warranty support, sound levels, volume, things like that. So there are things to compare. So while I often recommend, buy the cheapest one, but do check for if that specific model is known to have, higher return rates, issues, being significantly louder, things like that. So this is certainly interesting data to have a look at. And I wonder if we'll start to see similar data available for other GPUs, not just the 9070 XT, because I think that would be interesting to compare. Now, I thought I'd end on this, which is, looks like videocards.com has been closely monitoring the progress of PlayStation 5 emulation on PC, and it's looking like there's been another big step forward with certain 3D games actually able to launch with playable frame rates, although certainly not high frame rates and certainly not without graphical issues. Anyway, it's kind of interesting to follow this. I know a lot of PC gamers are kind of dreaming that by the time that GTA 6 launches, that maybe you could emulate it on PC. But so I would still, have my doubts whether emulation would be in a good state to run something like GTA 6 by that time. But progress does seem to be moving forward at a pretty fast clip, especially now that these are publicly available projects and things like that. So there's that. Anyway, don't forget to check out Proton Mail in the pinned comment and or video description and set up your free account today. I hope you guys found the video useful and or interesting, and have an excellent day.